Hey guys, and welcome back to Hoosier Hardware. Today we're going to be looking at this computer that I just basically put together just a few minutes ago, or maybe an hour ago. Time. It's hard to keep track of, but regardless, this computer is kind of unique in that it's made completely of parts other than the case that are completely used. There is nothing new about this PC other than the case, which I do think gives it a lot more aesthetically pleasing values. It's gonna make this thing a lot easier to sell. But regardless, I wanna go through the parts and talk a little bit about why I put this computer together the way that I did and what I'm gonna do with it in the near future. Okay, let's get the side panel off here so we can take a little bit better of a look inside and take a look at what's going on with this particular PC, and I'll try to throw in some B-roll with this so you can get an even better look at just what's going on here. But let's start out with the graphics card here. This is an RX 570, so this thing is very obviously targeted at 1080p gaming, and the reason I'm using this 570 in this build is it was laying around and I didn't really have a better use for it. Also, I needed something in the build that is fairly low power draw because this power supply comes from an old Dell unit that I'm really just trying to find a use for, and it maxes out at 255 watts continuous along that 12 volt rail. So I didn't want to go beyond that whatsoever because obviously this power supply is going to be screaming for mercy if I even really approach that, which this computer definitely does approach. This is the weak spot of this PC, and I hope, and I've been stress testing and it looks optimistic here, but I hope that I've kept my power draw low enough that I'm not really going to have any major issues with this particular PSU. With a max load on the GPU and CPU, we're drawing about 240 watts, so 15 watts below that continuous mark. But under a normal gaming load, we're really just hitting a little bit above 200 watts, so there is a little bit more headroom. Basically, we have a power supply here that allows us to run this PC, or at least should allow us to run the PC just fine in the near and hopefully further on in the farther future. We'll see about its longevity there. But we don't really have much upgrade path just because the power supply is actually limiting that. So if you do want to upgrade this PC, well, whoever ends up with this down the road is going to have to upgrade that power supply first and foremost. Now, you may notice that a lot of these Dell power supplies do not have 8-pin or 6-pin PCIe plugs, and that is true of this one as well. I'm using an adapter to adapt a couple of these SATA plugs into an 8-pin. And again, I've been sort of stress testing this just to make sure that everything is rock solid, and I'll continue to do that after this video is over as well. Probably just put it almost like an overnight stress test to make sure nothing pops or blows or anything melts or anything like that. But early returns are good, and it's looking like that adapter, which I don't really like to use, is going to be just fine for this system. Again though, this is a pretty low power draw card, so using that SATA to 8-pin PCIe adapter shouldn't be a big deal here. For our storage, we have a 120GB SSD as well as a 3.5-inch hard drive. This is a 1TB Western Digital hard drive. Again, they should be just fine for this build and give us a nice speedy boot drive here. And you know, this is a used SATA SSD, but it's also not really used very much. I basically buy these in somewhat bulk. I play around with them a little bit, test them out, and usually they end up in a used PC build that I then try to sell. And this 1TB Western Digital hard drive likely came out of another build that I purchased, one of those whole like Dell Optiplex systems or something like that. But it seems to work just fine still, so there's no reason not to throw it in there because that'll give whoever ends up with this computer a nice 1TB drive to run games off of. And then of course, no great used PC would be really done and complete without the ketchup and mustard power cables that are just all over this place. In fact, I purposely bought a 24-pin ATX extension, which I did need for this system because the power supply launches the 24-pin out the top, which you don't really see very often, but I needed this extension to be able to easily route that cable behind the motherboard tray and into the motherboard. So I did purposely seek out a very cheap 24-pin extension there. And we have a lovely mismatched pair of 4GB DDR3 sticks of RAM. We have an old Intel stock cooler, though this is one of the ones with a copper core in it, so it likely performs just marginally better than some of their later models that were just aluminum heat sinks with the fan attached. Still not a great cooler at all, but luckily the 3470 i5 that's in this system does not eat power and therefore also doesn't really get very hot. Now the motherboard here is a used Gigabyte GA-H61M-DS2, and of course I was reading that name off the motherboard. There's no way I would memorize that name, but basically we have this blue PCB motherboard. Got it from an online store that shipped it from China, took about 2 or 3 weeks to get here. Seems to work just fine. It does have a lovely weathered look on any really white plastic pieces on this motherboard. They have that nice yellow tint to them that you'll get in a motherboard that's been caked in dust for a long time, but it works just fine. At least it seems to be working just fine. There is a little bit of a coil whine with it, and it is what it is. You know, it's a motherboard, it does function. When it's in the actual chassis itself, it doesn't seem to be nearly as big a deal, so I'm not really all that concerned with it. And then of course, the case is the Deepcool Matrix 30, and I do love this case because you can pick it up on Newegg, usually for right around $30. Comes with a tempered side glass panel, actually has a little bit of room behind the motherboard tray that you can route cables fairly easily, and the cable management, there are holes everywhere in it for that cable management to get at least a somewhat clean look. Even in a case like this, things do look a little bit cluttered with all these adapters and cables running everywhere, but overall, I don't think it's a build that looks too bad considering everything in it's used. Everything is ketchup and mustard, mismatched colors, just everything aesthetically that you try to avoid with new PC builds. This thing breaks pretty much all the rules except putting it into a case with a tempered side glass panel. And one of the last things I want to mention about the Matrix 30, because I've used it a couple times now, that I am so appreciating this time around is the USB 3.0 port on the front panel actually has a cable that has the USB 3 header, but then also has a breakout USB 2 header on the cable. So even though this motherboard does not support USB 3.0 front panel headers, I can still plug that header into a USB 2.0 port on the motherboard and still get that front panel working with both of those USB ports running at 2.0 speed instead of 3.0 speed. It's not as good as 3.0, but at least it gives somebody that's using this PC both of those front panel USB connectors to play with. And I think that's a great feature on a case that's clearly geared towards a budget crowd. And it just seems like a simple cost-cutting thing that Deepcool could have done by cutting off that USB 2 header, but they didn't, and with this system, I'm just super glad they didn't, so good job, Deepcool. But that's basically been the rundown of this system. Let me know in the comments down below what you think about it, what you would change. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of you will mention the power supply, and I totally agree with that. That'll be something that gets posted very forthright on the listing when I do eventually post this up for sales, that the power supply just does not have much room at all for any future upgrades. It's one of the things that somebody might have to replace in the future. So other than the power supply, because yes, I'm fully aware of that, what else would you change about this system? What else might you do? Maybe try to clean up some cable management, that sort of thing. Let me know in those comments down below. And of course, if you like the video, give it a like, share, subscribe, and comment. All those things are very helpful to the channel. You can follow me both on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos around me from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.